When you die, how will people remember you? How do you perceive? You will be remembered at the time of your death. I do believe over the scope of 35 years in full-time ministry and 32 years of doing law enforcement chaplaincy, I do believe I've experienced most of the extremes of remembrance. Is that a pretty good phrase? The extremes of remembrance? I think I've experienced at least a lot of them. There's always new things to experience that I haven't encountered as of yet. I recall one long night in Wichita Falls in 1991. Still remember the year. It was a very busy night. I was on call that night. And I came in after a long night of working and responding to various situations to turn in my paperwork the next morning. And one of the young officers encountered me there in the hallway, and he said, "I sure could have used you earlier this night." And I said, "Well, I'm really sorry. I was tied up in this call. This is what's going on." And he said, "Oh, no, as it turned out, I didn't need you at all." I said, "Do tell." He was a rookie officer who had never delivered a death notification before. So he and his sergeant went, just the two of them, since I wasn't available to go and assist. And in the middle of the night, knocked on this lady's door, and she comes out, and of course their protocol is, "Can we come inside and talk to you?" And she said, "No, you can't." So they had to tell her, standing on the porch of their home, that her husband had died. She used a few choice words to describe her husband that I'll not repeat this morning. And then she proceeded to tell this young rookie and his sergeant, "It's about time that he's dead," and slammed the door in their face. I guess he didn't need me that evening. That's one extreme. When you think about how you'll be remembered, could you possibly imagine your loved one responding in such a way? In stark contrast, I think about the recent death of Lynn Anderson. Some of you will recognize that name. Lynn was a longtime minister in Churches of Christ, served for the Highland Church in Abilene for 19 years, and Lynn passed away here a couple of weeks ago. It was especially touching to me to see the tributes on social media that were composed by other ministers describing how Lynn had encouraged them and how Lynn had impacted their life. And here's one tribute in particular that I thought was especially moving, written by a minister in the Atlanta area. And here's what he says, and I quote, "Perhaps my favorite memory is the way he just wanted to know us. He didn't want to test us, put us in our place, get us to like him, think like him, or be like him. He trusted Jesus for all of that. He just made you feel like you really mattered. I'll always remember him for making me feel that someone like him thought I was worth getting to know." What a great tribute, and what a stark contrast to "it's about time that he's dead." That you have these meaningful, thought-provoking memories about your relationship with this person who made you feel valued, that made you feel like you were really worth getting to know and spending time with. But let's come back to front and center this morning. At the time of your death, what are people going to remember about you? When I was a sophomore in high school at Monterey High School in Lubbock, one of the required courses that all sophomores had to take, you had to take health class. And I thought, what a waste of time taking a health class. I wanted something more academically enriching, like physics or something like that. You know, I was serious about school. That's not really true. But I thought, health class, what a blow-off class. And little did I know that our teacher 24-year-old Stacy Elliott, I believe she was a first-year teacher that year when I was a sophomore in high school. She made up her mind that health class was going to be interesting and dynamic, and we were going to learn something. So she brought in guest speakers. She brought in a lady who was a recovering alcoholic and told us about her journey with AA and her journey to sobriety. We actually learned something with this lady. She brought in all kinds of guest speakers from all kinds of areas. I mean, it was actually a really good class. And one of the things that Stacy had us do that year is to compose our own obituary. Can you imagine 15 and 16-year-olds writing their obituary? I remember still to this day sitting at my desk drawing a blank. What am I going to write about my life? And fundamentally what she encouraged us to do is to think about, how will you be remembered? So again, as I think about the extremes of remembrance, and as I think about even being with families in a hospice situation or being with families when an unexpected death has occurred as recently as yesterday, I think about the conversations and the recurring themes that go along with such conversations. And as people reflect on the reality of death, there's several things I think that typically go through people's minds, and here's two recurring themes. The first recurring theme that you hear a lot is, have I done enough? I think that's especially true of our members of our older generations. As I anticipate death, have I done enough? Sort of troubling to think about that, because here's the truth. We will never have done enough. Isn't that true? We'll never have done enough. I think a second theme is that people struggle with issues that remain unresolved in their life. Next Sunday, we're going to spend some time in Genesis chapter 37. And there was lots of family conflict. It is not a story of brotherly love. It's a story of brotherly conflict in Genesis 37. So when people come to the end of their life and they're facing end-of-life issues, that unresolved conflict, especially if there's unresolved conflict among family members or very close friends, it has this uncanny way of coming to the surface. As Apostle Paul anticipated the end of his life, something very different was running through his mind. And I'm actually going to pause and I'm going to read this passage twice just to give us a chance to allow the message of the text to be fully internalized. Here's what he says in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 6. For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. I want to read it one more time. Let's just pause for a moment and let's let it sink in, let it internalize. What is he really conveying in these very personal reflections? One more time. For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. It's a very reflective passage, is it not? It's very personal. And I think that 2 Timothy as a whole can be characterized as probably the most personal of all of Paul's letters that are composed. Now, it's quite obvious that his personal reflections definitely convey a sense of assurance. There's no hint, there's no tone at all of, have I done enough? You don't pick up on that at all. There is also no sentiment of unresolved conflict from the past. And by the way, as you very well know, Paul had a past. He had lots of things that had occurred in his past, lots of things that he had done prior to his conversion, prior to meeting Jesus on the road to Damascus, as it's so described in Acts chapter 9. Paul had a past, and it wasn't pretty at all. But there doesn't seem to be unresolved conflict that he can't get over. There doesn't appear to be any unresolved conflict with other people. His personal reflections convey strong assurance. How encouraging for us. So my reaction this morning is, since it's such a reflective passage, it really serves as a meaningful springboard for us to pose what I'm going to characterize as some soul-searching questions. Great text for us to read and pose some soul-searching questions, so here we go. Not going to be long, but I think these are questions that have depth and substance, questions we need to pose to ourselves. Here's the first one. When you think about the events of your past, are there regrets that you need to address? When you go back to the recent past, or maybe you go way back, and you think about the events of the past, are there regrets that need to be addressed? Now is the time to ask such questions. While you have the time and the ability to address such regrets in a meaningful way, now is the time. When you're near death, when you're experiencing those final moments, most likely it's going to be too late. And the opportunity, the door that's open to address those regrets and to go back and take care of whatever needs to be taken care of, that opportunity is no longer there. More specifically, have you offended or harmed somebody else without making it right? Without going back to them and doing everything as far as it depends on you to be at peace and to live at peace with that person. Is that person still alive? Maybe that person's not alive. You can't go back. They're deceased, and it would be impossible to go back and communicate that to now. So it's now just between you and God making such peace. Is there a need for apology? Is there a need for reconciliation or an attempt to restore a broken relationship? Now, on the other hand, I think we ought to think positively too. Is there someone that you need to go back and thank? Someone who really deserves your sincere appreciation. There was a man who had a profound impact in my life when I was in college especially. And when he passed away in 2013, I went back to Lubbock and I went to his funeral. I had a really nice conversation with his daughter and told her how much he had meant to me and how he really shaped my entire adult life by just some things he did in such a good way. And she teared up and she said, towards the end of his life, he had those some of those regrets and some of those thoughts, has my life been meaningful? Have I done anything really good? And she said, I wish he could have heard some of the things that you're telling me at that moment during those latter years of his life. And while she and I had this great conversation, I regret that I waited till he was being eulogized to convey these very important sentiments about his life. The second thought-provoking question that I would pose to us this morning is, can you express assurance in the same manner that Paul does in this passage in 2 Timothy chapter 4? There is no doubt that Paul is communicating that he knew what awaited him regardless of how or when he died. Go back and read this passage in verses 6 through 8 in 2 Timothy 4. He knew what awaited him regardless of how or when he died. I read one particular scholar who's writing on 2 Timothy wrote these thoughts in reaction to this passage. I thought they were good enough. I just want to share them with you this morning. And here's what he says, and I quote. He says, in response to what Paul conveys here, turn your attention to things eternal. Turn your eyes away from the person who makes your life miserable. Resolve to clear away the trash of regret. Determined to stop dragging around the anchors of resentment and blame. Begin living today in light of that eternal tomorrow. When you do that, you will discover an inner joy that you've never known. And again, as we consider the tone of this passage in 2 Timothy 4, that's exactly what Paul has chosen. There are so many people who cannot bring themselves to focusing on things eternal, as Paul does here in 2 Timothy 4, because in their minds, their life has not turned out as they had once anticipated. And thus they remain stuck in deep bitterness and resentment. I think there's the bridge between Paul's reflection of the end of his life and our beginning of this new sermon series in Genesis chapter 37. So one thing I'm going to ask for you, I'm going to ask a couple of things of you. This is by way of homework for this week. And those of y'all who know me well, occasionally I do offer homework. I'm going to encourage you this week to go and read Genesis 37. Just read 37. It's not light reading. Oh, and it is not dull by any stretch of the imagination. It is full of drama. It is compelling. There is a lot to learn, and there's things that you'll probably be surprised by. And the second thing I'd like to ask you to do is pray for me as I dig into Genesis and think about this important theme of my life has not turned out sort of the way I thought it would. Because my heart is to reach out to people, not just those of us who church folks, but reach out to our entire community and convey this important message. So this morning, when you die, how will people remember you? What significant choices or commitments do you need to make this morning that would change a negative perception or response to such a question? Let's stand and sing our invitation song this morning.